Your task is to rewrite this script so that it stays the exact same length, conveys the exact same meaning, but uses completely different wording to make it 100% unique. This 1920 photograph contains a puzzle that nobody has managed to solve, until now. The basement vault at the Greenwood County Historical Society smells like aged parchment and dust. James Mitchell, a 38-year-old genealogist from Chicago, carefully inspects a worn leather book containing property records from 1920 Mississippi. He has spent the whole morning examining land deeds for a customer, turning up nothing but ordinary transfers. At 4:30, with the archive about to close, James reaches for a final container labeled Assorted Personal Effects, 1918 to 1925. Inside, wrapped in fragile tissue, he discovers a collection of photographs damaged by age and dampness. Then he spots it. The image is exceptionally well preserved, mounted on stiff cardboard. The photographer's Mark Reed's Crawford Studio, Greenwood, Mississippi, March 1920. It depicts a formal family grouping. An African-American couple sits at the center, dignified in their Sunday best. The man wears a pressed charcoal suit, his gaze firm and proud. The woman's hands rest delicately on her lap, her dark gown pristine, her eyes meeting the lens with quiet resolve. 3 children stand beside them. 2 girls, roughly 8 and 10, wear white frocks with ribbons woven into their neatly plaited hair. But it is the 3rd child that makes James pause. Between the 2 girls stands a boy of roughly 7. His complexion is fair. His hair is light brown and wavy. Even in the sepia tones, his irises are visibly pale. The boy is unquestionably Caucasian. James leans in, scrutinizing every nuance. The boy stands naturally, the man's palm resting protectively across his shoulder. There is no stiffness, no staged unease. He fits in seamlessly. James flips the photograph over and reads in faded pencil, Samuel, Clara, Ruth, Dorothy, and Thomas. March 14, 1920. He snaps a picture with his mobile and scribbles the names into his notebook. His thoughts race. In 1920 Mississippi, under Jim Crow segregation, a black household with a white youngster would have been unthinkable, hazardous, possibly lethal. James approaches the archivist, an elderly woman named Mrs. Patterson. "Do you recognize this family?" he asks, holding out the photograph. Mrs. Patterson gazes at it, a glimmer shifting across her face. "Recognition, perhaps memory. That would be Samuel and Clara Johnson," she murmurs. "Well-regarded people. He worked as a carpenter, she did sewing at home. And the children?" She hesitates. "There are stories, old tales that folks stopped discussing long ago." She glances at the clock. "If you want to grasp what that picture means, go see Evelyn Price. She's 93, lives at Magnolia Gardens. Her mother knew the Johnsons." Mrs. Patterson lets James keep the image. Nobody has asked for it in 7 decades. Maybe it's time someone uncovered its significance. Heading to his car, James studies the 5 faces again. 4 are logical. 1 defies reason. Whatever transpired in 1920, someone went to significant lengths to conceal it. This photograph is proof of something incredible, something perilous. Tomorrow he'll visit Evelyn Price. Tonight he'll start his investigation. The enigma has seized him. An undisclosed narrative waiting to emerge. A truth concealed for 100 years. In his motel room that evening, James powers up his laptop and begins searching. He starts with the 1920 census for Greenwood, Mississippi. He quickly locates Samuel Johnson, age 32, black carpenter, property owner. Clara Johnson, age 29, seamstress. 2 daughters, Ruth, 10, and Dorothy, 8. 2 daughters, no son, no Thomas. James checks birth registries next, hunting for any Thomas born in Lafleur County between 1912 and 1914. He uncovers several, but cross-referencing shows they all belong to other families. None vanished into a black family's portrait. He emails his research aide in Chicago, "Need death records for LaFleur County, 1918 to 1920. White couples dying within months of each other, especially with young children. Also, search orphanage logs." Returning to newspaper archives, James scrolls through the Greenwood Commonwealth. Then on February 3, 1920, he finds it, "Tragic accident claims local couple. Mr. Robert Hayes, 34, and his wife Margaret, 29, perished in a house fire on February 1. The couple leaves behind one son, age 6. One son, age 6, the right age for Thomas. James digs for more on the Hayes family but turns up almost nothing. No follow-up stories, no mention of the child's fate. He searches orphanages, Mississippi, 1920. The findings are bleak. A 1921 oversight report describes the Greenwood County Children's Home, overcrowded, abusive, children forced into unpaid labor. Minors as young as 5 compelled to work 10-hour shifts. Suspicious disappearances of children supposedly adopted, yet records cannot be verified. His assistant emails back, "Found it. Children's Home investigated in 1921. Several children unaccounted for. Director claimed adoptions, but no documentation. No charges filed. Facility closed in 1923. Records incomplete. Major gaps." James builds a timeline. February 1, 1920, Hayes couple dies. February 3, 1920, newspaper reports orphaned son. March 14, 1920, Johnson family portrait with white boy named Thomas. 6 weeks between the fire and the photograph. James examines the image again, Samuel's shielding hand on Thomas's shoulder, Clara's unwavering stare. What did they jeopardize? He finds the Johnson property record, 412, Elm Street, purchased in 1918. As midnight nears, James makes a vow to those 5 faces, he will share their story. He will locate Thomas's descendants and expose the secret buried for a century. No matter the cost. Magnolia Gardens nursing home rests beneath ancient oaks draped in Spanish moss. James arrives at 10 a.m., carrying the photograph and a voice recorder. Evelyn Price waits in the sunroom, a petite woman with keen eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. At 93, her memory remains crisp. "You're the genealogist," she says. "Sit down. My knees don't work, but my mind is sharp." James shows her the photograph. Evelyn accepts it with shaky hands, age, not emotion, and examines it for a long stretch. "Samuel and Clara Johnson," she says softly. "I was 5 or 6, but I recall them. My mother knew Clara from church, Mount Zion Baptist. Do you remember this photo being taken?" "I remember the gossip. People were frightened. Having that boy in the picture was reckless, but Samuel insisted. He said if something happened, there needed to be evidence the child existed. Proof that someone cared." James leans in, "How did they come to have him?" Evelyn gazes out the window. "You have to understand. In 1920 Mississippi, a black person could be killed for glancing wrongly at a white person. Touching a white child, that was inviting a noose. Yet they did it anyway. The boy's parents died in that fire. The Hayes family. Poor white folks. When they perished, no one wanted him. He had no relatives. The orphanage, the Greenwood County Children's Home, we all knew what that place was. Children entered broken, if they left at all. They worked them like slaves, beat them, starved them. Some simply vanished. How did the Johnsons get involved? Samuel was working near where the Hayes lived. The day after the fire, he saw the boy sitting on the burned house steps alone. The county officials were coming to take him to the children's home. Samuel went home and told Clara. My mother said Clara cried. They had 2 daughters and knew how dangerous it would be. But Clara said she couldn't let a child go to that place, no matter his color. She said God would judge them if they turned away. Evelyn's voice firms, so they took him. In the middle of the night before the county arrived, just took him home. How did they conceal him? They told people he was Clara's nephew from up north, visiting. A mixed-race child passing as white. Barely credible, but folks didn't pry if you gave them a story. Our community knew the truth. The black community shielded them. We all kept the secret. For how long? Almost 2 years. They called him Thomas. He played with Ruth and Dorothy. Went to church, learned carpentry from Samuel. Sweet boy, my mother said. James looks at the photograph with fresh insight. Why risk taking this picture? Samuel wanted proof. If they were caught, arrested, or killed, he wanted evidence the boy existed, that he was loved, part of a family. He saved money for months. The photographer, Albert Crawford, was white but open-minded. Samuel told him the truth. Crawford could have betrayed them. Instead, he took the picture and charged half price. Said it was the bravest act he'd ever witnessed. What became of Thomas? Evelyn's expression darkens. By 1922, it was too perilous. He looked unmistakably white as he grew. The Klan was active that year, threats, violence. Clara had a cousin in Chicago named Diane Porter, married to a white man, a union organizer. They sent Thomas north in June 1922. Clara wept for days. Did they stay in touch? Secret letters for years. Thomas wrote when he was older, said he remembered them, was grateful. After Samuel died in 1935, the letters ceased. Ruth burned them after Clara passed in 1947. Thought it was safer. Evelyn hands back the photograph. It's time the story was told. Samuel and Clara risked everything to rescue a child who wasn't theirs. Didn't look like them, in an era when that could have meant death. Find Thomas's family. Tell them what happened. Make sure people know that even in the darkest hours, some chose love over fear. James promises he will. Mount Zion Baptist Church still stands on Elm and 3rd, a modest brick building with a white steeple. James arrives Tuesday afternoon and meets Patricia Lewis, the church secretary. I'm researching the Johnson family from the 1920s, James explains. Patricia's eyes widen. Samuel and Clara, let me get Pastor Williams. Pastor Marcus Williams, a tall man in his 50s, studies the photograph James shows him. His expression turns grave when he notices Thomas. He and Patricia exchange a look. Follow me, the pastor says quietly. He leads James to the church basement archive, shelves lined with record books and documents. Pastor Williams pulls out a ledger marked 1918 to 1925. We've kept detailed records since 1912. The Reverend in the 1920s was Walter Thompson, meticulous about documentation. He also kept private pastoral notes about sensitive matters. Williams opens the ledger, carefully turning pages. Here, March 1920. He points to an entry, Samuel and Clara Johnson, with daughters Ruth and Dorothy and Ward Thomas, age 6. Family portrait commissioned. May God protect them in their righteous undertaking. Award? James says. That's significant. Reverend Thompson knew. Williams confirms, the whole church knew. Apparently, look at this. He turns more pages. The whole congregation was aware of the situation. James understands that they shielded that family. Williams explains that the black community there knew full well what Samuel and Clara had done and the reasons behind it. They formed a barrier of secrecy. Patricia brings over another container, the Reverend's confidential diaries. He documented it thoroughly. James reads the passages with swelling emotion. March 15, 1920. Samuel Johnson came to me deeply troubled. He has taken in a white child, fully aware of the peril. I asked him why he would gamble everything. He replied, Reverend, I looked into that boy's eyes and saw my own daughters. I could not send him to perish slowly in that institution. Clara stands with him. They ask only for the Church's intercession. I grant them my blessing and my secrecy. June 1921. The boy Thomas flourishes with the Johnsons. He calls them Mama and Papa. He remains ignorant that his skin color matters to society, only that he is cherished. This is the essence of true Christian faith. May 1922. Clara weeps. They must relocate Thomas to the north. The danger has grown too great. The clan parades openly. I pray God watches over this child and recalls this family's sacrifice. James captures every page with consent, his hands trembling. This is documentation that no one realized existed. Evidence of one of the most remarkable acts of bravery and empathy in American history. There's one more thing, Pastor Williams says. He unlocks a small wooden chest and extracts a delicate envelope. This was preserved with the Reverend's belongings, never opened by anyone except him. Inside lies a letter dated July 1922 from Chicago. The handwriting is childlike but deliberate. Dear Reverend Thompson, Mama Diane says I should write to tell you I arrived safely. I miss Mama Clara and Papa Samuel and Ruth and Dorothy so much. Mama Diane is kind and Uncle James too. They say I can attend school here. I will never forget my family in Greenwood. Please tell them I love them. Thomas. James feels tears streaming down his face. Pastor Williams's eyes are moist as well. This remains in our archive, Williams states firmly. But you have my permission to share this narrative. The world must learn what Samuel and Clara Johnson accomplished. Back in Chicago, James delves into municipal records, hunting for Diane Porter. He begins with the 1920 census, looking for black women named Diane wed to white men on the South Side. He locates her, Diane Porter, age 26, married to James Porter, age 29. Occupation, union organizer. Address, 47732, South Indiana Avenue. The 1930 census shows them still at that address, now with 2 children of their own, plus a third child recorded as nephew, named Thomas Hayes, age 16. There he is, Thomas Hayes, concealed in plain sight within the census, listed as a nephew. James searches for Thomas Hayes in Chicago across the decades. The trail is faint. He appears to have lived quietly, shunning attention. But James uncovers a marriage license from 1935, Thomas Hayes wed to Anna Schmidt. Occupation, carpenter, just like Samuel had been. James checks death records. Thomas Hayes died in 1987 in Evanston, Illinois, age 73. Anna passed in 1995. They had 3 children, Robert Hayes, born 1937, Margaret Hayes, born 1939, and Elizabeth Hayes, born 1942. James's pulse quickens. 3 children who would now be in their 80s, potentially still alive, possibly with children and grandchildren of their own who are unaware of their family's true background. He searches for Robert Hayes first, the eldest son. Property records indicate Robert owned a home in Oak Park until 2015, when it was sold. James finds an obituary. Robert Hayes died peacefully at 78, survived by his wife Susan, 3 children, and 7 grandchildren. The obituary names the children, Michael Hayes, Jennifer Hayes, and Thomas Hayes Jr., another Thomas, named after his grandfather. James searches social media and locates Thomas Hayes Jr., a middle-aged man living in Chicago, employed as a high school history teacher. His Facebook profile is public, featuring family photos, posts about social justice, and pictures from a recent trip to Mississippi visiting civil rights landmarks. James stares at the screen. Thomas Hayes Jr. teaches history, posts about racial justice, visited Mississippi civil rights sites, and has no clue his grandfather was raised by a black family who gambled everything to rescue him. James composes a careful message, Mr. Hayes. My name is James Mitchell. I'm a professional genealogist and I've uncovered information about your grandfather, Thomas Hayes, that I believe you and your family do not know. It's an extraordinary story involving immense courage during a very challenging period in American history. Would you be willing to speak with me? I can provide documentation and evidence of everything I've found. He sends the message and waits, anxious. This is the moment when everything shifts, when a hidden history surfaces after 100 years. 2 days later, Thomas Hayes Jr. responds, "Mr. Mitchell, your message has me very intrigued. My grandfather rarely spoke about his childhood. He said his parents died when he was young and he was raised by relatives in Chicago. We never knew much beyond that. I'd very much like to hear what you found. Can we meet?" They arrange to meet at a cafe in downtown Chicago. James arrives early, nervous, carrying a folder with copies of everything: the photograph, Evelyn's testimony transcribed, church records, census documents, newspaper articles about the Hayes fire. Thomas Hayes Jr. arrives exactly on time, a tall man in his late 40s with graying hair, warm eyes, and an open, intelligent face. He's dressed casually and carries a worn leather messenger bag. They shake hands and sit down. "I'll be honest, Mr. Mitchell," Thomas says, "I'm skeptical but curious. My family history has always been a mystery. Grandpa Thomas died when I was 10. He was a quiet man, kind, but never talked about his past. Just said his childhood was difficult and he preferred to look forward, not back." James opens his folder and carefully removes the 1920 photograph. He slides it across the table. "This is your grandfather," he says, pointing to the young white boy. Age 6 or 7, March 1920, Greenwood, Mississippi. Thomas stares at the photograph, his expression shifting from confusion to shock. These people are a black family. Samuel and Clara Johnson with their daughters Ruth and Dorothy, and your grandfather Thomas Hayes. I don't understand. James tells him everything. He starts with finding the photograph, moves through Evelyn's testimony, shows him the church records, explains about the fire that killed Robert and Margaret Hayes, describes the orphanage and what would have happened to a 6-year-old boy sent there. Thomas listens, his face growing more emotional with each revelation. When James finishes, there's a long silence. "My grandfather was raised by a black family," Thomas finally says, his voice thick. "In Mississippi in 1920, for almost 2 years. Samuel and Clara Johnson risked their lives and their daughters' lives to save him from that orphanage. They hid him, protected him, loved him. Then, when it became too dangerous, they sent him to Clara's cousin Diane in Chicago, which is how he ended up here." Thomas stares at the photograph, tears streaming down his face. "He never told us. Why wouldn't he tell us?" "Maybe shame," James says gently. "Or maybe protection. Even decades later, in the 1960s and 70s, when your grandfather was raising his family, racial tensions were intense. Maybe he thought this story would bring trouble. Or maybe he was protecting Samuel and Clara's memory. Or maybe," James pauses, "maybe it hurt too much to talk about. He lost his birth parents in a fire, then lost his adopted parents when he was 8. That's a lot of loss for a child." Thomas wipes his eyes. "Can I?" He reaches for the photograph with shaking hands. "May I?" James hands it to him. Thomas studies every detail: Samuel's protective hand on young Thomas's shoulder, Clara's steady gaze, the 2 girls flanking him. "They saved him," Thomas whispers. "They saved my grandfather, which means they saved all of us. My father, me, my children. None of us would exist if not for their courage." "That's right." Thomas looks up. "Are there descendants from the Johnson family?" "I believe so. I haven't traced them yet. I wanted to find you first, but Ruth and Dorothy both had children. There's a family tree out there that connects to yours through the years 1920 to 1922, through love instead of blood." Thomas sets the photograph down carefully. "Mr. Mitchell, I need to tell my family, my siblings, my cousins. We need to know this story." He takes a deep breath. And I want to find the Johnson descendants. I want to thank them somehow for what their ancestors did. I was hoping you'd say that. They talk for 2 more hours. James shows Thomas every document, every piece of evidence. Thomas asks questions, takes photos, makes notes. As a historian by training and profession, he wants to understand everything, verify everything, make sense of this revelation that's rewritten his family's story. As they prepare to leave, Thomas grips James's hand firmly. Thank you. Thank you for finding this, for caring enough to track it down, for bringing this to me. It's the most important thing I've ever learned about my family. There's one more thing, James says. He pulls out the letter young Thomas wrote to Reverend Thompson in 1922. Your grandfather wrote this 2 months after arriving in Chicago. He was 7 years old. Thomas reads it, and when he finishes, he's crying again. He loved them. He called them Mama and Papa. He never forgot them. And we forgot him. We let this story disappear. Thomas folds the letter carefully. That changes now. Will you help me find the Johnson family? Absolutely. James returns to his research with renewed purpose. He needs to find the descendants of Ruth and Dorothy Johnson, the 2 girls in the photograph who grew up knowing they had briefly shared their home with a white boy their parents saved. He starts with Ruth, the older daughter. In the 1930 census, Ruth Johnson, aged 20, still lives with her parents in Greenwood. But by 1940, she's gone, likely married. James searches marriage records for LaFleur County, Mississippi, 1930 to 1940. He finds it, Ruth Johnson married to William C.R. William Crawford turned out to be Albert Crawford's son. The photographer who captured the Johnson family's bravery had a son who fell for Ruth Johnson and wed her. They raised 4 children, Albert Jr., Clara, named after Ruth's mother, Samuel, after Ruth's father, and Mary. James traces their lineage forward. Clara Crawford, born in 1937, married Jerome Washington in 1958 and relocated to Memphis. They had 3 offspring, including a daughter named Ruth Washington, born in 1962. James locates Ruth Washington on social media. Now 63, she's a retired educator living in Memphis, frequently posting about family, faith, and civil rights heritage. He dispatches a message akin to the one he sent Thomas Hayes Jr., explaining he's uncovered an incredible narrative about her great-grandparents. Ruth Washington replies within hours, my grandmother Ruth told me stories when I was young about something secret my great-grandparents did, something brave. She said I'd understand when I was older, but she passed before she could tell me. Is this about that? James arranges a phone call. When they connect, he relays everything, sharing the photographs and documents via video. Ruth Washington listens with her hand pressed to her mouth, tears flowing. They saved a white child, she whispers. In Mississippi in 1920. Oh my Lord. Your grandmother Ruth knew him. She was 10 when he came to live with them. She would have remembered everything. She never told us the details. Just said her parents did something dangerous and good, something that showed what real Christianity meant. We always wondered. James then tells her about Thomas Hayes Jr., about finding the grandson of the boy her great-grandparents rescued. He wants to meet you, James says. He wants to thank your family for what Samuel and Clara did. Ruth Washington falls silent for a moment, overcome. 100 years later, she finally says. The family's coming back together after a century, if you're willing. Of course I'm willing. This is everything my grandmother hoped for. I think she wanted this story told. She wanted people to know what her parents did. James then searches for Dorothy's descendants. Dorothy Johnson married Marcus Lewis in 1935 and moved to Chicago during the Great Migration in 1942. They had 5 children, one of whom, Patricia Lewis, born 1945, still resides in Chicago. James realizes with a start, Patricia Lewis and Pastor Marcus Williams, the church secretary and pastor at Mount Zion Baptist Church who helped him locate the church records, are descendants of the Johnson family. They already knew parts of the story. They've been guarding it, preserving it, awaiting the right moment. James calls Pastor Williams. "You knew," he says. "You're Dorothy Johnson's grandson." "I am," Williams confirms. "My grandmother Dorothy told my mother everything before she died. And my mother told me. We've been waiting for someone to assemble all the pieces. Someone from outside who could tell this story properly. Why didn't you tell me immediately?" "Because the story needed to be discovered, not handed over. You found the photograph. You tracked down Evelyn. You connected the dots. That gives it authenticity, makes it real. If we just told you, it might have seemed like family legend or exaggeration. This way, you verified everything independently." James understands. Thomas Hayes Jr. wants to meet the family. Ruth Washington in Memphis as well. "Then we'll make that happen," Pastor Williams says. "We'll bring everyone together, the descendants of Samuel and Clara Johnson and the descendants of the boy they saved. This is what my great-grandparents would have wanted." 3 months later, on a warm Saturday in June, 2 families gather at Mount Zion Baptist Church in Greenwood, Mississippi. Ruth Washington has come from Memphis with her 3 children and 2 grandchildren. Pastor Marcus Williams is there with his extended family, 7 descendants of Dorothy Johnson. Other Johnson relatives have traveled from across the country, nearly 30 people in total. And Thomas Hayes Jr. has brought his entire family, his 2 sisters, his children, his cousins, his nieces and nephews, 23 people who carry the blood of the boys Samuel and Clara Johnson saved in 1920. The church sanctuary is full. Media is not invited. This is private, sacred. James Mitchell stands at the front with Pastor Williams. Between them, displayed on a large screen, is the 1920 photograph, Samuel, Clara, Ruth, Dorothy, and young Thomas. Thomas Hayes Jr. speaks first. His voice shakes with emotion. "I'm standing here today because of an act of extraordinary courage and love. My grandfather, Thomas Hayes, lost his parents in a fire when he was 6 years old. He should have been sent to an orphanage where he likely would have died or been broken. Instead, 2 people, Samuel and Clara Johnson, risked everything to save him." He looks at the Johnson descendants gathered before him. They weren't rich. They weren't powerful. They were a black family in Jim Crow, Mississippi, which meant they lived every day under threat of violence. Taking in a white child could have gotten them killed, and they did it anyway. Thomas pauses, composing himself. "My grandfather lived to be 73. He married my grandmother, raised my father and aunt and uncle, saw grandchildren born. He worked as a carpenter, a trade he learned from Samuel Johnson. He lived a good, quiet, decent life. In all of that, all of us exist because of what your ancestors did." He steps down and approaches Ruth Washington. "I don't have words adequate to thank you, but I want you to know we will never forget this. We will tell this story to our children and grandchildren. We will make sure Samuel and Clara Johnson's courage is remembered." Ruth Washington embraces him, both of them crying. Around the sanctuary, there's not a dry eye. Pastor Williams speaks next. "My great-grandparents Samuel and Clara Johnson were ordinary people who did an extraordinary thing. They saw a child in danger and responded with love despite the risk. That's the simplest and most profound truth of this story." He gestures to the photograph on the screen. "This picture was taken as evidence, as proof that Thomas existed and was loved. Samuel knew it was dangerous to document what they'd done, but he insisted. He wanted there to be a record, even if it cost them. And now, 100 years later, that photograph has brought our families together." Ruth Washington then shares stories her grandmother Ruth told her, memories of young Thomas playing with her and Dorothy, learning carpentry from Samuel, helping Clara in the garden. "My grandmother said Thomas was shy at first, traumatized by losing his parents. But slowly, over months, he began to smile again, to laugh. She said Clara would hold him and sing to him, and Samuel taught him to measure wood and use tools. They loved him like their own. She pauses. And when they had to send him away, when it became too dangerous, my grandmother said her mother cried for weeks. Clara never stopped thinking about him, wondering if he was safe, if he was happy. She kept hoping for letters, for news, and she got some secretly for years until the letters stopped. Thomas Hayes Jr. stands again. I have something to share. He pulls out a box he's brought with him. When my grandfather died, we found this in his attic. We never knew what it meant, but now we do. He opens the box. Inside is a small wooden toy, a carved horse worn smooth by time and handling. Samuel Johnson made this for my grandfather. We know because there's a tiny SJ carved under the base. My grandfather kept it his entire life, 73 years. He kept this toy. Kept this connection to the family who saved him. He hands the toy to Pastor Williams. This belongs in your family's history. It's proof that he never forgot them, just as they never forgot him. The two families mingle, share stories, embrace strangers by blood but connected by a bond stronger than genetics, the bond of sacrifice and love across the color line in one of America's darkest times. James watches it all, documenting with photos and notes, witnessing history correcting itself. After the gathering, Thomas Hayes Jr. and Pastor Marcus Williams hold a press conference outside the church. The story has leaked, too many people knew about the reunion, and now journalists from across the country have descended on Greenwood. Thomas speaks to the cameras. In 1920, my grandfather Thomas Hayes lost his parents in a fire. He was 6 years old, alone, and about to be sent to an abusive orphanage. A black family named Johnson took him in, hid him, protected him, and loved him at tremendous risk to themselves. Today, our families reunited to honor that act of courage. He holds up the 1920 photograph. This picture was taken as evidence, as proof that a child existed and mattered. Samuel and Clara Johnson wanted the world to know that they had loved this boy, even if it cost them everything. 100 years later, their wish has come true. The world now knows, the story goes viral. Major newspapers run it. Television networks feature it. Social media explodes with shares and comments. The photograph of Samuel, Clara, and the children is seen by millions. The response is overwhelming. People are moved, inspired, challenged. In the comments and conversations that follow, people discuss racism, courage, compassion, and what it means to do right despite the cost. Some criticize, why focus on a black family saving a white child? What about all the black children who needed saving? It's a fair question, and Pastor Williams addresses it directly in interviews. This story doesn't diminish other struggles, he says firmly. Samuel and Clara Johnson's daughters, my grandmother and great-aunt, faced racism their entire lives. The Johnson family knew oppression intimately. That's what makes their choice so powerful. Despite everything they suffered, despite the danger, they chose love. They chose to save a child who would grow up with privileges they'd never have. That's not a statement that racism doesn't matter, it's proof that their humanity transcended it. Thomas Hayes Jr. adds, I grew up white in America with all the advantages that brings. My grandfather grew up white. Our family has benefited from systemic racism for generations, but none of us would exist if not for a black family's courage. That's a debt we can never repay, but we can honor it by fighting against the systems that made their act so dangerous in the first place. The Hayes and Johnson families establish a foundation in Samuel and Clara Johnson's names, funding scholarships for foster children and supporting child welfare reform. The 1920 photograph is donated to the National Museum of African American History. They were everyday laborers striving to endure within a merciless racist structure. Yet when faced with a decision, overlook a child's anguish or gamble everything to intervene, they selected love. That's heroism. Not the flashy variety, but the kind that reshapes the world one life at a time. Thomas Hayes Jr., now in his 60s, addresses students and congregations, recounting his grandfather's ordeal and the Johnson family's sacrifice. My grandfather survived because two individuals valued a child's existence above their own security, he says. That's the America I aspire to build, where we recognize each other's humanity first, where we take chances for one another, where love conquers fear. The Johnson descendants carry their forebears' legacy with pride. Ruth Washington's granddaughter, pursuing social work, remarks, "I'm not shocked Samuel and Clara acted as they did. When I study their photograph, I see it in their eyes, strength, empathy, resolve. They instilled those same traits in their daughters. It's ingrained in our family, handed down through generations." 5 years after the reunion, the families convene once more, this time for a happier milestone. Thomas Hayes Jr.'s daughter Sarah is marrying Marcus Williams III, Pastor Williams's grandson. The ceremony occurs at Mount Zion Baptist Church, where Samuel and Clara worshipped, where Reverend Thompson chronicled their bravery, and where two families reconnected after a century. The church is adorned with images spanning generations, Samuel and Clara with young Thomas in 1920, Thomas Hayes as an adult with his wife and children, the Johnson descendants through the decades. And now this instant, two families united not merely by history but by affection. During the service, Sarah and Marcus pay tribute to their ancestors. They lay blossoms before a portrait of Samuel and Clara Johnson, acknowledging that without them, neither family would be present today. "Love brought us together twice," Marcus declares in his vows. First in 1920 when my great-great-grandparents rescued Sarah's great-grandfather. And now in 2025 when we choose each other. We carry their legacy onward, the legacy of love that transcends every obstacle. The reception is jubilant, festive. Hayes and Johnson descendants dance together, exchanging narratives, fortifying connections forged 5 years earlier. The racial divisions that once rendered their association unthinkable now seem remote, overcome by shared heritage and chosen kinship. James Mitchell attends as a distinguished guest. Now in his mid-40s, he's constructed his profession around this narrative. Yet his deepest fulfillment arises from watching these families flourish together. "This is what I envisioned," he tells Ruth Washington, now 71. "Not merely unearthing the past, but mending it, carrying it forward. You restored our history to us," Ruth says. "We always knew Samuel and Clara were exceptional, but we didn't know the full account. Now we do. Now the world does." As the evening winds down, the families assemble for a photograph. Dozens of descendants from both lineages stand together where Samuel and Clara once stood in front of the church that safeguarded their secret. Someone produces the original 1920 image and holds it aloft. Then, now, a century between them, yet the bond intact. Thomas Hayes Jr. gazes at the old photograph one final time, at his grandfather's youthful face, at Samuel's shielding hand on his shoulder. "Thank you," he murmurs to those long-departed faces. "Thank you for everything." Later that night, Sarah and Marcus visit Samuel and Clara's graves in the church cemetery. The headstones, once neglected, have been refurbished, cleaned, and encircled with flowers that descendants plant regularly. "We're naming our first child after them," Sarah says softly. "Samuel if it's a boy, Clara if it's a girl, so the names endure, so they're never forgotten." Marcus clasps her hand. They won't be forgotten. Their story is part of history now, part of the record. They stand in silence for a moment, honoring the bravery that made everything possible. Above them, stars gleam over Mississippi. The same stars that shone on Samuel and Clara Johnson in 1920 when they made their impossible choice. The same stars that shine on their descendants now, living the future those two courageous souls made possible. A photograph taken in 1920 held a puzzle no one could decipher. Now, a century later, the enigma has been resolved and revealed a tale of courage, sacrifice, and love that surpassed the harshest barriers ever constructed between human beings. Samuel and Clara Johnson risked everything to rescue a child who wasn't theirs. They asked for nothing in return. They anticipated no recognition, no compensation, no fame. They acted because it was just, because a child needed assistance, because love demanded it. And now their story will be recounted forever, a reminder that even in the bleakest eras, even within the most unjust frameworks, individual acts of bravery and kindness can transform the world. The photograph remains at the Smithsonian, observed by thousands annually. But its true heritage resides in the families, Hayes and Johnson, white and black, eternally linked by an act of love that refused to acknowledge the color barrier. This is the mystery resolved, that humanity at its finest is more potent than hatred. This is the truth exposed, that love at its essence sees no pigment, only a child needing rescue and the fortitude to act. Samuel and Clara Johnson are gone. But their legacy endures in their descendants, in the family they preserved, and in everyone who encounters their story and opts to be brave, to be kind, to be